Hello everyone. Today we're going to make a Lamborghini float in the air. Here we have a picture I took in Los Angeles. Before we do anything to the image plate, we will first look and study the lighting in the photo. As you can see, our light source, which is the sun, is off to the right side of the image. Although we don't see the sun in the picture, we can see the light is coming from the right side by looking at the way the shadow is casted off the car. The light ray is at an angle between 30 to 35 degrees. We need to keep the lighting situation in mind as we work, so our shadow will stay consistent to the image in order to make it look believable. And on the side note, this tutorial is not for beginners. It will require some basic understanding of Photoshop, but it doesn't mean you can't learn anything. However, it may be a little bit confusing to follow without some prior knowledge of Photoshop. Either way, it could be fun to watch. So let's jump in. First thing we're going to do is to get rid of that ground shadow. We're going to pull up a new layer and create a layer mask over the shadow by using the brush tool to paint over that area. I am using a basic brush at full capacity, so I quickly use the eyedropper tool, keyboard I for the shortcut, to sample the ground color to paint over with. There are many ways to do this. You can use the lasso tool or you can use the magic wand tool to select the entire area. I prefer to use this paintbrush tool because it is more precise and there's less cleanup work needed afterward. Now that I have the shadow masked out, I will duplicate that layer and make it green so I can see clearly the area that I need to patch up. Just like that. Then I will sample the ground texture and replace the shadow. Sometimes you have to make several passes to get it right. In this case, I have to do 3 passes. First is to get the large area on the right. Then I duplicate the white painted line separately, and I had to skew it in using a little bit of the warp tool. And finally, the small area to the left. And also, sometimes you have to use the eraser tool to erase areas that you don't need and focus on blending the ground texture. That way the ground texture gels together with the rest of the grounds in the photo. And just like that, we have magically deleted the real shadow. Before moving to the next step, I'm going to do some housekeeping on my layers to keep things organized. Renaming some of the layers and using folder to group my layers neatly together. Now I'm going to turn off my ground layer temporarily so I can use it as a reference to paint in my new shadow of the car. Pay attention to the shape of the shadow, like how the corner curves. Look at the opacity of the shadow. Gets a bit lighter on the tail end. We need to mimic the gradient of the shadow like a real shadow in the photo. I have duplicated the tip of the cone and dragged that layer in front of the shadow layer to bring it back to the foreground. Having that cone overlap the shadow will really help sell it. The new shadow needs some adjustments. I have lowered the overall opacity of the shadow, so some of the ground texture will come through. Then I will duplicate parts of the right side of the shadow, then erasing some of it out to create a gradient and adding a light Gaussian blur to soften up the edges. I think now the new shadow is looking good and it's making the car float in the air. Then the next critical part of this step is the placement of the new shadow. To get the shadow placement correctly, we need to look at the angle of the light ray. We need to get the light ray angle by looking at the angle of the shadow on the buildings in the background. I'm going to draw out a line to represent the light angle and use it to determine where the new shadow begins and ends. I'm going to line up the line to each end of the car to find out the length of the cast shadow of the car. Now that we have the shadow, the last thing we are going to do is to add a quick motion blur to the vehicle to give it some motion. Go to the opacity box to dial it down a little bit. There, that looks better. There you go. That is our floating car. Just to recap on some of the tools and lessons we went over in this tutorial, the following are the tools and techniques we covered. Number 1, brush tool. It is used to paint. Number 2, eyedropper. We use it for color selection. Number 3, layer mask. This allows you to mask out an area on a layer. Number 4, motion blur is a motion effect. Number 5, photosampling. It is a duplication technique to patch up an area with the photo plate. Number 6, lighting. We went over some basic of light direction. Number 7, shadow. We went over basic understandings of how to cast shadow correctly. Thank you for watching, and I hope we had some fun and learned a new Photoshop magic trick. Please subscribe if you'd like to see future tutorial. Please leave a comment if you have any tutorial requests. See you guys next time.